The third meeting of the Transportation Action Committee. We are all here, as one of my esteemed members of the citizens of this town said to me, you know, you really didn't identify who people represented. So on my far right, we have Ellen Begley, who represents the Board of Selectmen. We have Mary Jane Driscoll, who represents Capital Planning. Mark Andrews needs no introduction as the town administrator. I represent the school committee, and Dr. Rabinovich represents the management of the Wareham School District. The agenda for tonight is to continue on the process of the issue of privatization and the issue of funding, regardless of that decision, the Transportation Department. And we also have in the back, although he doesn't really want to be identified, the chairman of the Finance Committee, Mr. Frank Heath, and much closer to us, because we asked him to be, is Jeff Chatro, who's the manager of the Transportation Department. So having said that, I would like to see if we could make some good progress tonight. The issue of privatization, is there anybody who has any questions that they would like to ask and hopefully get answered before we see if there's a consensus on the issue of privatization?
I have some questions.
Fine.
I first want to just say that I really hear so much about transparency in this town. And the last capital planning meeting that I was at, where you and Dr. Rabinovich were present, we talked about the trust factor in this town and the fact that people in this town don't trust their elected officials. And it's true, it's a long history here. But in the interest of that, I have some questions I need to ask about some numbers that I see on these papers, because I worked in that department for 22 years, and 6 of that I ran it, and I don't understand the numbers. So if I don't understand the numbers, how can anyone else? I first want to ask you, Jeff, at the last meeting you talked about the homeless costing $132,000.
That was a state report, yes. It wasn't my numbers, it was the state's numbers. And that was their estimate for Wareham for fiscal year 11.
Really? So I would expect that would show up somewhere on these papers, because if the homeless is costing us that amount of money in transportation, which is what I thought you said.
It is what I said, but
okay.
It wasn't my number, it was the state's
okay.
number. And hopefully they will use it as a basis for reimbursement.
I would like you to point that out to me somewhere on this page where it's $132,000 for the homeless.
The $132,000 is embedded in our expenses. There is no line item for the homeless.
I know there's no line item, but it should show up somewhere. In fact, if it's costing us...
I'm not even telling you that I know that number is correct.
Mm-hmm.
I am simply telling you that that's what the state's estimate is for fiscal year 11, and the state's, actually it was more than an estimate. That was their calculation for fiscal year 11, and their estimate for fiscal year 12 was $125,000, slightly smaller. How they got that number, I have no idea.
Well, I just don't think that we can use that number as a basis for anything, because...
I'm not asking you to use this as a basis. I actually only mentioned it. I'm interrupting you because I only mentioned it as a positive, because if that's the number they're using as a basis for reimbursement, then that's great, because I have no idea where those numbers are in our numbers.
Okay, then I would ask that I would like to know what it is costing us. Because one of the things you also said was that the reason why the transportation is going up, the cost, is because of the homeless. It's costing us so much money to transport the homeless. So then I would like to know what it is costing us. Okay? I also have a question about...
If Mr. Sweat, Chairman, can
I know Mary Jane at this point is getting sensitive about being interrupted, so I'm going to let her finish for a while.
If Barry can clarify anything for me, I'd love to hear it. I'm okay with that.
Go ahead.
Okay. I believe where it's embedded in there is in special education. That's where the homeless, as well as out of district, as well as in district special ed transportation. So it's all part of that number, because they use similar vehicles, the gas, the mileage. One of the things Mr. Sweat mentioned and showed in his presentation
Missed it.
showed how the mileage doubled for special ed, where we stayed consistent with big bus mileage. And some of that is because of where we have to transport homeless children as well as out of district. So that was where that $139,000 is. It's involved in that cost. And to answer the part where the state got the number, there was a survey, and we needed to put actual students' names and where they were being transported to.
Okay.
Now, just one more clarification. The only way I am comfortable saying our expenses went up, but I have no idea what the number is, because the state did their own estimate, is it is a matter of record that in 2006, we did 168,560 miles of what we call sped transportation, but that includes homeless transportation. And then in 2007, as a matter of record, it went from 168,000 to 293,000 miles. So no one, I'm sure, on this committee would suggest that going from 168,000 to 293,000 was inexpensive. And so that's the only thing I'm asserting.
Okay, I just want to, I have a couple other questions, but I just want to find something first. My other question is also good that Barry brought that up. The point being is that that it's embedded in the sped cost. So I would guess that if, just knowing what I know about transportation, if the costs are going up for your special needs transportation, you're going to see that in sped supplies and sped salaries, which you do see it in sped salaries. Sped salaries actually have gone up $150,000. Sped supplies went up roughly $7,000. Okay, so if that's the case, how are we putting on that many more miles? Which actually that mileage started going up in 2007. When we started taking back more of our out-of-district costs. That's what happened in 2007.
That's exactly what I said.
Yes, not just homeless, but all of our out-of-district, right. That's what happened. It directly relates to the cost of the contracted services going down in 2007. But it has only gone up 50,000 miles since 2007. In 5 years, 50,000 miles. That's really not an awfully lot. That's, roughly 10,000 a year. Okay, and for the increase in pay to go up 150,000 in 1 year, which is what it looks like here. Salaries went up, according to the paperwork you gave us, just sped salaries from 2011 to 2012, $150,000. And yet miles only went up, total miles for the whole fleet, 5,000 miles. 5,000 miles isn't even a bus run. A bus run is 12,000 miles. So I'm just saying that the numbers just don't make sense. They don't make sense. Regular salaries went up $4,000 compared to $150,000, yet regular supplies went up roughly around the same. So it doesn't make sense that that's where the cost is. I just think the numbers need to be clarified. I just feel like...
We fortunately have the manager of transportation who developed this budget. So, Jeff, would you like to comment on the change from the last fiscal year to the current fiscal year with respect to sped salaries?
Spent $91,000.
Talking to your mic, Jeff?
We spent $91,000 on monitors.
Okay.
We've increased them from 4 to 12. That cost $91,000 approximately. I may be off $1,000 here or there.
Anything else on the salary?
That's the most dramatic increase.
That's the most dramatic.
Okay. I have a report that actually I did in 2010 where we had 10 monitors. So I don't understand that number either. I don't understand that they're saying that they've increased the monitors that greatly when I know that I had 6 in-town runs, and every single one of those runs had a monitor except for one, and I probably had 5 out-of-district monitors. So to say that we've increased monitors, I don't see that either. I just don't see it. And unless we're going to get a list of employees, then I just don't understand it. And I also have,
So, just to be clear, are you suggesting these numbers are overstated?
I don't know what's wrong with the numbers. I believe $150,000 of an increase in salaries, if that's the actual amount, is absurd in 1 year.
Okay, the manager of transportation who has access to the numbers has told you 91 of the $150,000. There were contract increases, but I'm not sure where you're going, because if you're telling this committee that you're concerned that the numbers are overstated, that would actually be a good thing in terms of the issue of privatization versus remaining a part of the town department. You see what I'm saying?
It would be a good thing, except for you're saying that you actually spent this amount of money in 11, and you're projecting to spend it in 12.
Right.
So where is it being spent?
Right. I'm trying to stay focused, okay? I'm not saying you don't have good questions, okay? But I'm trying to stay focused on the issue of privatization versus remaining a town department. To the extent that you think these numbers are overstated, okay? And of course, we're talking about a year in which we're already operating. So the year will progress and we'll see how much actually gets spent. But if we're talking about the fact that you think these numbers are overstated, to the extent that these numbers are overstated, it actually increases the case for the fact that we shouldn't privatize. So I'm trying to stay focused on the issue of privatization versus staying a public department.
Here's my answer to that. My whole thought process behind all of it is, for me, it's not about private or in-house. It is about what is the most efficient. Because even you can have an in-house program that's not efficient.
Okay,
And it can
stop.
cost as much as a
I have
private.
to stop you. We have to stay on track because we've had 2 meetings and we haven't actually made any decisions. I don't think anybody doesn't want efficiency, okay? But the issue before this committee is privatization versus remaining a public department, okay? Therefore, anything relevant to that is fine. But if these numbers are overstated, okay, and of course a budget is just that, it's a budget, it's not actual, okay? That only means that it makes the case even more that we are more efficient being a public department than being private. And do you see why I'm trying to stay on track?
I understand what
This
you're
is
saying,
not
Jeff.
an audit of the transportation department.
No, I don't think it is. But I think in order to know whether it's best for the taxpayers to go private or not, you have to first see how it's being, is it efficiently being run? And are the numbers correct that they're giving us to make that judgment by? How do you make a judgment based on numbers that don't make sense?
I don't think it's fair to characterize these numbers as not making sense. 91 of the 150,000 has been explained by the manager who has access to the numbers, and these are budgeted numbers, not actual. Time will tell as to how much actually gets spent. But if you think this category has too many dollars in the budget, I hope you're right. I suspect Jeff hopes you're right, because that means he'll spend even less taxpayer money providing the service. But the question before this committee, agenda item 1, is privatization versus staying a public department. So anything related to that question, I accept as relevant.
Well, I think that by you saying that and putting my questions into that category that is not relevant, that is basically asking not only myself, but every taxpayer in this town to vote without information. Because you need to make an informed decision. You just can't go and say, oh yeah, well, guess what? It's best to keep it in-house because it's actually more efficient. When you keep saying budget numbers, but FY11 has already been spent.
Correct.
And it still has gone up from FY10.
So if we ignored FY12, current year, ignored FY13, and just used FY11 numbers, okay, the case would be even more dramatic that it's more efficient to stay as a public department. Is that what you're suggesting we should do?
No, I'm just saying you want to make it like they're wishy-washy numbers because they're not budgeted numbers, when I know that it's half the year has gone by. You can pretty much tell what your numbers are going to be by now, okay? And the other point is that it just isn't fair to ask us to make a decision based on numbers that someone who had intimate knowledge of the numbers doesn't understand the numbers.
Okay. Ask Mr. Tetro any question you'd like.
I think I pretty much asked my questions. I thought I did. And
Okay, you only asked him one question.
well, I think I made a couple of points. Number one, I don't see anywhere where the cost for the homeless is showing up in here, and I would like to know what that
Okay,
is.
you will not see the cost for the homeless on a line item.
Okay, then
But
I'll
you will
ask.
see the cost, you will see the cost embedded in all those numbers related to SPED, because those are the categories in which you will find them.
Actually, Jeff, if you take the revolving account and you look at the money coming in from the homeless children that we bill, that's half. So all you have to do is say our cost should equal that. Because when you bill for the homeless, you bill half of your cost. So whatever they've brought back into the revolver, our cost should equal that.
But
That's
there's a lot
how
of situations we're only doing one way, which means there is no revenue coming back.
you can still figure out your cost for one way. You just figure out what your cost is. So that is your cost. Your cost is whatever it costs you to get that child to
It
school.
wouldn't show up in the revolving account unless we get money back.
Excuse me? What?
It wouldn't show up in the revolver unless we're getting money.
But you
from
can
it.
figure out your own cost, can't you? Whether it shows up in the revolver or not.
You
You know
just
what
said it-
it's
you
costing you to run the bus, right?
You're correct, Ms. Driscoll. Yes.
I mean, I would guess you know what it costs you to take that child to school. So whether it shows, I'm just saying that it's an easy way to do it by the revolver. If you have a few cases where we're only doing half the transportation, then you just figure out your cost for half of that. Wait a minute, Jeff, I'm not done. The other thing I would like to see, if you don't want to give me the cost, then I would like to see how many children we are transporting homeless and where they are going to. Okay, because we can do that. I know you can do that. I've done that chart many times myself. You can give me a list of every run we have, every SPED run we have, and you can tell me how many kids on that bus are from Wareham, that are Wareham students, how many kids are homeless, and how many kids are other. And by other, I mean the children that we transport that other towns are responsible for, and we get 100% reimbursement for them.
Okay, let's say you had that information. Okay, what would you do with it?
It would help me understand why the homeless is costing us $132,000.
I didn't say it was.
Well, I would use it to see where it shows up in these numbers, because there should be some money coming into that revolving account that equals the money for the homeless, and I just don't see it.
You don't have to worry about that number. Why don't you have to worry about it? Because it's not a number being used as a basis for this decision-making process.
The whole efficiency of the system is what we're basing our decision on here. The whole efficiency of the system and whether or not these numbers are accurate, that is very important. So, yes, I do want to see.
Here's my frustration, okay? Your frustration is because you don't have everything you want in order to be able to make a recommendation, okay? We have been waiting for everybody to have everything they want in order to make a recommendation for years, okay? For years. So at this point, it seems to me that we ought to finally stop analyzing to the point of paralysis and actually say, do we have enough? Okay? When I put this together, I didn't care what the numbers said. If the numbers said that we should privatize, I was happy to do that. But the numbers didn't say that. The numbers said that it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Or putting it another way, if we decided to privatize, the number, based on the bids we got, was about $2.7 million. Let's even subtract $300,000 to allow for the fact that we asked them to have a fleet that was about 3 years old instead of average 3 instead of 5. So we'll subtract $300,000. By the way, that's more than I added to get it to equal. So now we're down to $2.4 million. $2.4 million isn't anywhere near what we spend in this town when we take it to town meeting. In other words, even if you wanted to privatize, even if everybody on this committee said, boy, I love the idea of privatizing, the hassles associated with running a transportation department are so great, get rid of it, we don't need it. There is no money to provide private transportation for this town. So my frustration is, when is this come to an end that we stop analyzing? Please.
Mr. Sweat, I personally feel that you are expressing years of frustration. This committee, this is our third meeting, correct?
Yes.
So any member of this committee that you've also had the luxury of analyzing, as you said, you kind of quoted that it was analyzing to the state of paralysis. I personally don't want to be paralyzed, absolutely, but I will not encourage anyone on this committee to vote without every single member having every bit of information that they feel they need to come to make a decision.
That may
So
never
I-
happen, you realize.
Well, I think that it can. I absolutely think that it can. However, there can't be a stalemate, because I think that it's quite clear that you do not want to privatize.
Only because it would cost this town a fortune.
But that's your opinion based on the information that you have. If we don't have all the information, then there is not going to be consensus of this committee. There is not. So if everyone needs to have the same information that you've had the opportunity to analyze, then everyone on this committee should have that opportunity.
I haven't denied anybody any opportunity.
Absolutely.
Except that every time we meet, there is more information that is asked for in order to move forward.
But having the opportunity to analyze the data that we've been given, and then there's going to be subsequent questions. Certainly that you wouldn't want to inhibit someone from analyzing what you give them. I mean, am I supposed to just throw this in the back of my car and not look at it again? So we're analyzing this, and because there's certain things on here that don't make sense to us because it's the first time that we've seen this information, or me personally, certainly not Mrs. Driscoll, but I'm looking at this and I might say, wow, that pops out at me, there may be a simple answer for that. Or this pops out at me and there may be a simple answer for that. Or, as a result of analyzing it, I may ask, well, what's the next step that would make sense to me? Now,
Okay,
that's what I'm saying.
okay, let's all vote to privatize. Okay? Mark, $2.4 million. Any problem?
Big problem.
Big problem. Oops. So we already know from the town administrator that he's budgeted 1.3 and change, 1.34 million and change to give to the transportation department to run for fiscal year 13. We know that it's going to be at least somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.4 million, probably actually more than that, but let's use $2.4 million. That's more than $1 million. So even if we all said we should all privatize because we can't get good numbers, so therefore we're going to assume that privatization is the way to go, we can't afford it.
Can we afford at least $500,000 per year to slowly but surely replace the buses? Can we afford that?
Interesting question. Very interesting question, and I would argue a very relevant question. But I was trying to get to that question second. But we can't get to that question until we have a consensus that we can't afford to privatize. If you don't like, for example, the idea that you don't have enough numbers, okay, in order to make a recommendation, I would argue, fine, don't worry about the recommendation, let's just privatize. But since our town administrator says we can't afford to privatize, that's an academic question.
Okay, can I speak now? 'Cause
Please.
You just put words in my mouth, because I didn't say I didn't have enough numbers. There's plenty of numbers here. What I said was the numbers that I see before me don't make sense to me, who ran this department for 6 years.
Does the
Wait a
FY11
second.
numbers make sense?
I want to, the FY, actually, she said that I had seen this information before, and I just want to point out that these numbers that are nothing that I would be familiar with, because they're for his years, not mine years. You know what I'm saying? So, but do they make sense? Actually, Jeff, I haven't really analyzed them and to, like, compare them to the year before. I was comparing them to what you gave us, 11 to 12 to 13. That's how I was doing my comparison.
But the FY11 numbers are your numbers.
No, they aren't.
Oh, yes.
No, they aren't.
Yes. They're your numbers.
I left in 10.
But they were a budget prepared by you.
They might have been prepared, but these are what actually was spent. This is what was actually spent, Jeff. You know what? That really is unfair. You can budget. I could ask for $1 million from the town and not get it. So they gave me a fixed amount, and that's what I based my numbers on.
We
and
spent every dime of
what
the
was spent-
FY11 budget.
And more.
Well,
and more. So
plus
those
the
aren't mine.
revolver.
I didn't spend that money. That wasn't my year. I didn't spend that
no,
money.
I'm just saying the budgeted number for FY11, we spent all of it and plus some from the revolver.
But the numbers that are on this paper, what was actually spent, so those aren't my numbers. They're what was actually spent. Just like the mileage from FY11 is not my mileage. I wasn't there. I didn't have anything to do with that. But the other point is that because I do feel like that it is important that we do make a decision about the buses. We have to make a decision. We need to move forward. But I also feel that you seem to forget. I missed the first meeting.
I didn't forget that.
In the second meeting, I was already so confused. I needed to go home and look at some stuff before I based my questions on information that I was confused about.
I've actually spent quite a bit of time with Mr. Tetro to make sure that I wasn't confused, okay? I don't know how many members of the committee have spent time with Mr. Tetro to make sure that their confusion was relieved. But we have a responsibility as members of this committee to eliminate confusion before we get to the meetings.
That's why we need information.
Mr. Sweat?
Yes.
Okay. May I? All right. Can I?
I'm doing all the talking. I'll shut up for a while.
And not to anybody's particular.
Barry, talk into your microphone.
Thank you. Not to anybody's particular comment, but the issue about how much it costs to run transportation. I think if we look at how much has been provided in the line item over the last 5 years, it's basically been the same number. We've gone up, we've been cut, it's basically the same number. And every year, except maybe one, we've had a deficit in the department because it has cost more money. So I think we can ask for all the numbers we want, we can analyze it, but the bottom line, to offer the services that we provide, it costs what has been budgeted during your tenure in that department as well as Mr. Tetro's. So we have not been providing enough money, we have not been replacing our buses. So what's in front of us is to make a decision whether we want to spend $2.4 million or we want to spend less than that, keep it in-house and replace the vehicles. Or reduce services so whichever way we go, we save money. And the cost to that are to the people who will lose their jobs. And that's simple as it goes. We can make it much more complicated, but we have to decide we can either afford it or we can't afford it. And what can we afford? What can the budget withstand? The current budget, as you know, I don't need to tell anybody here, is extremely tight, and it's tighter than any of us want. On the other side of it, I'm looking at a $2.7 million deficit. I'm looking at potentially 40 people being laid off or more. So we need to start talking about whether or not we can afford transportation. If we can't, then how are we going to provide it? Because even doing what we have to do legally is going to cost what is in that budget. And we still are going to have to replace the vehicles.
I would really like, yes, please.
If I could just, I mean, nobody has $1 million. I just want to go back to the previous. I mean, if we had $1 million, we wouldn't be in this position.
Or you might have a better use for it.
Well, we could. We had $1 million at one point in stabilization about a decade ago, and it's gone. And we're trying to reestablish that year by year going forward for rainy day issues. But I think the points that are being made, if I could just follow this center line of understanding, is that we have certain costs, obviously, in these transportation lines. And I have a report because the committee asked me to. I forgot to bring it because I rushed out of the office. But all of the cities and towns on the South Coast have worked towards privatization. For whatever reason, maybe it was easier for them, they're smaller, or whatever it was, except for one, I believe Dartmouth kept their sped transportation in-house. So I think it's just worthy of just, you know, once again, we know what the bid came back, and it's a live bid because it was well within the last 90 days. So we know what costs are from the private sector. But I think it's worthwhile just kind of making sure that we all understand, because I could spend all day with Mr. Tetro and, you know, still have some questions because I'm not a transportation expert in certain areas of what's being presented here. And I think that is what Mrs. Driscoll is getting at. So maybe if we just took a moment to walk through this, because I see some changes and there were some reductions in costs with regards to insurances and other things that we had done.
Just to be clear, whoa.
Sorry.
The re-
We took buses off the road.
No, exactly. The reductions were based on reducing the fleet by 13 buses, assuming we didn't provide transportation for grades 7 through 12. That's the reason for the reductions.
Okay. And all I'm saying is that it might help us understand, because it doesn't matter who prepared what lines for budget. There's a long way from July 1st to June 30th. We all know that, because I've had holes in roofs in gyms presented to me. I've had issues with regards to police vehicles that literally fail while the police are chasing criminals around town. So maybe if we just took a minute to just walk through the top grid, and while Mr. Tatro is here, I know his time is.
When you say the top grid, you mean the revenue?
If we just went through is it this?
It's mostly revenue with the exception of some revolver expenses.
Okay, so maybe if we just, would that help the committee?
If they want to explain where the revenue came from, I don't, and
I think that would be worthwhile. The rest of it's back up year by year, correct me if I'm wrong, cell by all of the revenue and expenses that we have incurred for the program. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay, so, that would work for me, so at least we'd be able to understand what's on this grid. And then if we had further questions, we could ask them at an appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
can I just ask Mark, you do realize that the first page is the revolving account?
I understand.
Stuff, okay?
Yep.
It's not, has anything to do with the budget.
That's not true.
Well,
Just looking at a different one.
I'm sorry. I've got the non-net revenue. I've
Yeah.
got,
Oh, you have a different sheet maybe than I do? Yeah, non-net revenue. It's,
without transportation, grade 7 through 12, with it, is that? the
That's
fit?
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Maybe if we just went down the grid and had a better understanding
can
of
we
it.
do the second page and the third page also?
Go through the whole thing.
There are only 2 pages. I don't know what the third page is.
I think it's the backup by subsidiary account, by,
I didn't present a third page. I don't have no idea where it is,
okay.
what it is.
This is the one that you brought to the capital planning, got? It has the line items that were spelled.
Oh, I didn't print this out, but it's the same document. It's just printed out on more pages. That's all.
I think we were looking for paper last time, Mr. Chairman,
Not a problem.
so we got plenty of paper. So would that make
Okay.
sense?
Jeff, line 1. Any questions on line 1?
I thought he was gonna explain it, not us have to ask questions. He can't just explain each category to us?
Well, some of the line items are, shall I say, self-explanatory, which is to say, that's the number we got from town meeting.
Oh, the budget, yeah.
Let me,
So,
in
non-net
fact,
revenue.
let me do that. Let me take the revenue side. Non-net, with the exception of any category related to vehicle replacement, those are the numbers that we got from town meeting, or in the case of FY13, the amount requested from the school committee. There is a subsequent line item that would show what happens if we eliminated busing for grades 7 through 12, but let's not deal with that for the moment. So
No.
I'm just dealing with the 3 columns,
Right.
okay?
So you're saying the non-net, that very first number, is what the town allows us?
Correct. The next 3 line items relate to the revenue that the revolver generates. Some of it is intra-district, meaning between the LEA and between the Transportation Department. Some of it is out-of-district. So you end up with a total for FY11, since those are actuals, that was approximately $215,000 for the revolving. That produces a gross revenue of $1.8 million. Then there are in-kind expenses, which total $214,000, the biggest one of which is the health and dental insurance for active employees. That's about $80,000, but it's only about a half a dozen employees.
I mean, maybe I
Yes.
didn't hear you right, but, so you're working on FY13 when you said?
No, I'm working
1.8?
on FY11 because those are actuals.
Okay, so, but you said 1.8, is it, I have 1.588, do I have the wrong number? When you totaled down the, that first little revolving fund revenue? Do you
The
know?
gross revenue for FY11 is 1.803 million.
Oh, that, yeah, that's not, for FY11?
Yes,
Actual.
actual.
Oh, he's way down there, okay. I thought he was then going into in-kind, which is,
In-kind total 214,000,
yes.
80,000 of which was health insurance for about a half a dozen employees. There are a small amount of revolving fund expenses. Now, you could theoretically break down that many more expenses, but instead they were left in the main expense part. But these happen to be big ones, specifically salaries and fuel. Those total 36,000. That produced net revenue of $1.552 million actual for fiscal year 11. So the numbers for FY12 are estimates. The number for FY13 are budgeted. They're not dramatically different except for the fact that the fiscal year 13 budgeted number, the requested number, which is different from what the town administrator put in his preliminary budget, is significantly higher at 1.585 million. Is there any question on revenue?
If I could, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Just for the listening audience, maybe to understand,
The numbers on the
and
sheet.
audience here, on the in-kind expenses, what we're doing here is attributing back the people costs for the human capital to run the program.
That is quite correct. And furthermore, these numbers, 214,000 right now, are actually absorbed by the LEA. They do not show up in the transportation budget. They're simply the numbers that get reconciled as part of the overall school district. But we decided to include them here because it would be a mistake to think that those expenses weren't really part of running a transportation department. Okay, if we go to expenses, I'm going to let Jeff go through the line items because he's much more familiar with the expenses than I am. Jeff, why don't you start at the top of the expense line and make any comments you think are appropriate for both the television audience as well as the committee.
The manager's salary is divided amongst sped and regular, so it's half sped, half regular. So the first line is half of the manager's salary. Transportation department does have a secretary, which again, her salary is also divided amongst sped and regular, so that's half of the clerical salary. Regular salaries are what bus drivers get paid to drive full-size, regular education school buses. Contracted services are, for example, the Bristol agricultural students out of town. You know, we do contract someone to take those students out of district to some schools. Supplies and materials, again, it's split up between regular and sped. First one is that's how much we spend in fuel and to repair our regular full-size school buses. And then obviously just other expenses, we cover physicals, licenses, that kind of stuff.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could, to Jeff, so in that line item 01, the one above, 3300-05, supplies, materials, the gasoline to run the transportation program is included in that.
Any
Yes.
fuel expense, whether it's diesel or gas, correct.
For
the
the
big
regular.
buses.
So, yeah, that
The
one's
big buses,
Right.
okay.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, then we go into the very similar categories on the sped side. Against half the manager's salary going towards the special education. Clerical split up in half. The salaries for sped drivers, whether it be in district, out of district, homeless is categorized in there as well. Sped supplies, again, that's what it costs to maintain, although it's been somewhat more expensive, but that's what we've estimated and have budgeted to repair our special needs vehicles. I think I missed the line. The contracted expenses above, that's for our specialty schools, for some of our severely disabled students that we transport to that are out of town, that have very specific needs and need to be transported out of town. Again, other expenses for SPED is going to cover the.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The sped in and out of district contracted, doesn't that also include any out of district that we're doing ourselves?
Anything out of district.
Out of district, so a homeless child who's going to Plymouth would fall into there?
That's where the driver would get paid from, yes. No. The SPED in and out of district? No. Driver would get paid out of the special needs regular salary for homeless.
So why the in-district? Is it just sped out of district? Do you have contracted services in town?
There are some parents who choose to transport their own child, which they are reimbursed for. And that cost has to be captured somewhere.
In town? They drive their own child to school in town in Wareham?
Currently, no. In the past, yes.
It's an in and out of
It's
district.
it's in and out, yeah.
Right. What is the in? I understand the out. The out is,
In district, we also have
Potential.
cross-district students that live in Minot who have to go to Deacon's. We have
Yes.
to, you know, and
and you pay
Deacon's and go
the
back.
parents for that now?
That wouldn't be I thought you were asking, that's in town, that's, a driver would get paid out of that. Apparently, it's paid for out of district. You're shaking your head, at what?
Does anyone understand what he's saying? That can maybe explain it to me, because I'm asking you, the sped in and out of district, what part of it is in district?
Cross-district.
Okay, so I
Minot to
just,
Deacon's, Deacon's to Minot.
okay, so if I'm a parent and I live on the Deacon's side of town, and I decide to
No,
drive
you may
my...
not transport your own student to do that, no.
But you just said that you could.
I thought you were talking about the whole thing. I apologize if I misspoke. We only pay parents for the out-of-district, not in-district.
Okay, so then my question is back to what's the in district?
Cross-district.
I
It
ju-
could be
so-
a potential. The reason the account is called in and out is because, for instance, if the vehicles keep failing, our special needs vehicles, and then we have an extra wheelchair child to transport in district, sped, we may have to contract it out. It would be
That's
paid
what I'm
out of this
asking.
account.
If there were contracted services that would transport our children in our own school system, that's what I asked. That was my original question.
Right,
And
and-
I was.
And the answer is yes, but
Okay.
that doesn't mean necessarily at this moment in time we
I
have any.
understand that. I understand that.
Okay.
I just asked if that's what the in was, if it was contracted services working in our town. Yes, that's what I asked.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could ask,
Please,
Just on the-
Mary Jane, are you all finished?
Yep.
Okay.
just on the footnote with regards to the savings, that $120,000 that was paid to another contractor?
That's why that account went down, yes.
So we went from 108,692 to an estimated, for current fiscal, projected 50,000.
That's correct.
What was that
We now
Was that-
transport our own students, the Wareham students, to the Swartz Center.
okay.
Yes, because are you saying then it's 108 in FY11 is actually $120,000 less than what it was in 10? Is that what you're saying? Because you just said you saved $120,000.
I'm saying we paid an outside contractor to transport Wareham students to the Swartz Center $120,000 last year.
In FY010.
In FY
11.
It says 108.
No, mine says 161,502.
Okay, let's be clear. The note says 120,
Where is that?
okay? The note says 120. The actual cost for FY11 is 108. The projected cost for FY12 is 41. So the savings are gross savings, but there's still costs associated with providing the service in-house, and that's why it's gross saving, not a net saving.
So you're saying basically that you're guessing, you're projecting into the future, the $120,000.
It would have cost a gross amount of 120 if we stayed with the vendor. Now we have less than that, substantially less, because we have our own vehicle and we have our own drivers.
Okay, so it would have cost 120, but it actually cost 108.
No, not saying that.
It cost 108 in FY11. You know what it cost in FY10? 55.
Okay. I want to come to you, but it seems Mary Jane is
Jeff, I'm
not
just
satisfied with
pointing-
the answer.
He asked a question about the 120. I had the same question. You know that. I asked you privately. And it doesn't make sense, because on the side it does say we saved $120,000.
The full year contract, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, the full year contract for FY12 would have cost $120,000. In FY11, it was for the entire category. I'm not saying the entire category represents Schwartz. The entire category represented 108. For FY12, it was estimated it would have cost 120 for the full year. By getting the vehicle and eliminating that particular run, we were able to substantially reduce it. That's why the budget went from 108 to 41,000.
But FY12 isn't even done yet.
That's correct, but they told us that if we wanted to have that service provided for FY12 for the entire year, it would cost us $120,000.
Okay, but even still, to say you saved $120,000 when you don't even know what the cost is for this year yet is not.
There's still a driver cost. You're probably going to end up saving.
I said it's a
about-
gross saving. The contract itself would have been $120,000. Do you
Okay.
understand the difference between gross and net?
I understand the
Okay.
difference, Jeff. I understand
Okay,
exactly.
but you still look confused, and I'm
No,
not sure
I don't
why.
look confused. I don't, as I said, it's very ambiguous, all of it.
It's,
It just is.
wait a minute, then we can't leave it, because there is no ambiguity if you truly understood it. We had 108,000.
You know what? This is what I really think, Jeff. You want me to tell you what I really think? I really think that the bill for FY11 was supposed to be 120.
No.
It ended up being 108, and by eliminating that service, that certain provider, you're saying that you saved 120 because you eliminated a certain provider. And now you're trying to make that number make sense by saying it was going to be 120 in FY12, but it really, now it's only going to be 41. How do you even know it's going to be 41? You're not done with FY12 yet.
41,000 is an estimate, and it
Okay.
says estimate at the top. Okay? Now, keep in mind that the contract for the Schwartz run was significantly increased, am I correct? When we went to them to renew, that's part of the impetus behind getting our own vehicle. So they were significantly increasing the cost from FY11 to FY12.
Okay. Did you include the cost of the vehicle in your savings?
No,
Because you had to buy a vehicle to do the run.
that's why it's called a gross savings. That was the cost of the
How much did the vehicle cost?
$90,000, approximately.
93 and change.
Ellen?
We kind of already had this discussion on the first meeting, as I recall, because I'd asked similar questions, because it was a significant decrease, but I said that it's not really $120,000
That's correct.
savings,
That's correct.
because we had the purchase of the bus, you still have to have a driver, you still have fuel costs, and those kinds of things. So, saving $120,000, that may have gone to the contractor, but we certainly have expenses related to that. So that was the first meeting that Mary Jane wasn't.
Completely agree. Yes. Okay. Can Jeff move on, or are there further questions?
I have just one question, because we went to FY11 actual, and it may go to Mrs. Driscoll's point. I don't know what the estimate was, so we may have had an estimate, FY11 estimate of the budget, but this was actual $108,000 and, well, $108,692. So I guess I'm still unsure as to why that we think that would cost $41,000, so I understand what she's saying. And I
You think
that
it should be more or less?
I think it'd probably be more.
Well, we certainly hope not, but that's our best estimate as we speak, and of course, we've got half the year is gone, so I think we have a basis for extrapolating what the full cost would be.
Well, what has been expended thus far?
For,
That line item?
In that line item.
I don't have an exact dollar amount, but I know it's 120 a day to go down the Cape with a contractor. I don't have an exact number for what we spent to date in front of me.
But is that the way you calculated the 41,000, using the daily charge?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, but that doesn't include operational, that includes operational costs, maintenance of the vehicle, fuel, insurance, it includes, the
That should
driver
be-
includes everything is $120 a day? That's how much it costs us?
Correct.
But just, I'm sorry,
For
Christian.
that particular one.
Let's be,
Only half, and that's only half. We do it, it's a 50-50, so it's only half the cost.
let's be clear. Once you take the contractor out of the picture, who absorbs all of those costs that you rightly pointed out, other costs could be spread around these other expenses. You see what I'm saying? Because we don't allocate to that line item depreciation, maintenance. Maintenance goes into its own line item. You see what I'm saying? So the 41,000 maybe seem understated to you, and that's because there are other costs associated with it that show up in other line items.
Well, right, and I understand the other line items, but I think that then that savings, $120,000 is a little inflated, because it does come out of
It's
other
more
line
than
items.
inflated. It is a gross savings solely based on that's what would have cost us for the contractor to do it without us involved.
Right, so
That's
then.
all it says.
Understand.
Can I ask a question
Please.
now? Because I thought that line item said contracted services, and we were told it was what we pay private contractors.
Yes.
But then he said it cost him $120 per day for this run to the Cape, and that's only our half, what we do half.
The 41,000 does
Is
not.
that what he said?
The
Is that
41.
what you said?
Falmouth pays half, and we're responsible, let me not use
Okay.
the word pay, okay?
Okay.
We're responsible for half of the transportation. Falmouth is responsible for half of the transportation. Because I don't have enough vehicles, I've had to go to an outside contractor for our half of that run.
Okay, I
So
understand.
that half is $120.
I-
So the daily cost and the other half goes to Falmouth is $240.
So my point is this, because that's what kind of confused me a little bit, is that I had originally asked if homeless were in there, and you said that they weren't. But obviously, that's a homeless child, because if we're sharing the cost with another town, that's a homeless child. And the other point is that you kind of made it sound like we were doing it. That's why I asked the question. But obviously, we're not. It's a private contractor that is doing it, and we're paying for half, and another town is paying for half because it's a homeless child. Am I right?
For that one,
Right, okay, so there are some homeless kids in that category that is out of district. That it does include some homeless children in there,
correct?
which I asked that question about. Okay,
Only if it's contracted out.
yes, I understand that. I
Okay.
understand that.
Can-
My other question? right?
Yes.
Can we find out how many contractors we have, how many different vendors we're using?
That's probably easy. How many were you using?
I believe currently, as of last week, we had 2 different ones that we were using.
Just two.
That's all we need right now.
So we use 2 vendors, but how many runs are they doing each, do you know?
One.
They're each doing one run?
Mhm.
Okay, so the 120 is one child, do you know the cost for the other?
I'm sorry, I don't recall. It's roughly the same, though.
Probably
I-
around the same?
I don't recall the exact number.
Okay.
It's been in place a little longer.
Go ahead, Barry.
A lot of questions have been asked about this particular 330004 and the comparison between what was actually spent in 11-161-502 versus what was budgeted or estimated for this year, 41-502.
You said 161. It's
Yeah,
108.
it's
108.
108, 692.
I don't know why I have a different numbers, but this is saved from another version maybe.
Okay.
So the bottom line in my mind, and my question would be, are we saving money? Forget the amount of money. Are we saving money by doing it ourselves instead of contracting it out? And I would ask Ms. Driscoll that question.
You know the answer.
Right.
And I want to hear you say it.
We are.
Thank
Barry,
you.
I've
Okay.
long been an
That's the
advocate
end of
of
my
in-house.
question. Thank you.
I've long been an advocate of in-house
Okay.
busing,
Okay. Jeff, continue,
as long as
please.
it's efficient.
Continue.
Other expenses, again, back for sped, physicals, license, whatnot. OCAD salaries, that would be if I were able to take back the Bristol Aggie run, so I don't have to pay someone else to do it. That's an estimated salary for a driver. Contracted, again, the OCAD down, that again would be our Bristol agricultural run. That's what we pay someone else to do it for us. So obviously, right now, there's no supplies. We don't have anything allocated for that. There's no other expenses. We don't have anything allocated for that. And then the homeless transportation is what we're required to do by McKinley-Vento to transport students, and that fluctuates, you know. I never know how many we may or may not have.
It is interesting that we have 17,000 and the state is estimating 132. Where they got that number remains to be seen, but as I said, I hope they reimburse us based on their number, not ours. Now, and the last item, the last number I'll take, which is 200,000 is of depreciation, is based on the fact that for FY11, technically, we had fully depreciated half our fleet. So that means you don't technically have to show an expense. 400,000 is the amount, some would argue 450,000, depending on the price of a vehicle, is the amount we probably should be depreciating, just based on the notion that we would actually take out of service a vehicle that was 10 years old or older. But 200,000 is actually, from an accounting perspective, the correct number, because the rest of the fleet was fully depreciated and you don't have to continue to expense it. The surplus deficit is what it is. It's not particularly, it's meaningful to me. It may not be necessarily meaningful to other people, but it's based on that new way of looking at the transportation revenue and the transportation expenses, including in-kind, revolver, and all that. And then the town contribution is, of course, whatever they put in plus the deficit. So can we move on, or do anybody have further questions for Jeff? Yes.
I may have missed it, I'm sure I did. You probably addressed it. The sped supplies, 30005, of almost $200,000. What was that?
It's to fix the sped vehicles and fuel, parts and fuel for special.
Parts and fuel. Okay.
It's very misleading. I've asked that fuel be listed as the part of the descriptor, because once you realize it's fuel, it's obviously...
I drive a car. I get it.
No, that's not what
And
I
I
mean.
don't even pay. I don't even pay what you folks get to pay, because, you know, you don't, I'm sure that the schools are exempt from some
Yeah,
taxes.
taxes,
that are
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is why it was not included in the bid, because it was so much more advantageous for us to pay for the fuel rather than a vendor, because they don't get that advantage. So, how many of us on the committee think we should privatize the transportation system? I'm not asking for an actual vote, I'm just asking for an opinion. We're not into voting, because we're trying to develop consensus, as I've said many times.
You know, I'm not, I guess my question would be this, and I don't know how I would have access to any of this information, because it's not anything that you could provide me, because you've certainly been very generous with that. What I would like to know is kind of what, and I don't know if Mr. Andrews had these conversations, what prompted surrounding towns to privatize? What is the actual cost? If, you know, and have the conversation, if you had the choice now, say, you know, the 5, 10 years into it, if you had the choice now, today, whether or not you should have kept it in-house, or are you, you know, or the costs associated with, that may be unfair, because certainly in 10 years, the costs, we all know, have skyrocketed. We paid by far much less for fuel, we paid less for everything. But would they have kept it in-house? Do they regret their decision? And I guess that's my question, because having a conversation with someone that has privatized, what is the actual cost? Because you can certainly, as we know, because RFPs have gone out, we may send out an RFP and a price comes back. Is that really the price? You know, it's kind of like when you're doing your kitchen. Is that really the price? So I understand that. I'm not married to the idea. However, given that, I find it hard to believe that 305 school districts would all want to go back to having in-house transportation. I know that some of the districts, it's apples and oranges, because, you know, certainly like down the Cape or those kinds of places, there's regional high schools. There's many regional school districts. Am I correct? No? Few?
Yes, there are
No, I
quite
don't
a...
mean just on the Cape.
No, on the Cape.
I don't mean just
Oh.
on the Cape, Dr. Rabinovich. I mean in the district. I mean in the Commonwealth.
In the Commonwealth,
of
many,
Massachusetts. There's many.
many.
So there's some towns that have 20 out of 310?
Yes.
That's not many.
Right.
It's been growing, though. It's been,
It's growing because the state wants it to grow.
Well, because here's the thing.
Political entities are not in favor of it.
Well,
for the most part.
we all know that that's kind of the way, that's the direction that many, many towns and cities, well, I don't know about cities, but towns are heading, is regionalizing many services. So not just school districts. Believe me, I don't even want to go there. Where I want to go is the transportation issues and having a conversation with people who are experienced in privatizing. All of the towns that surround us have privatized school transportation, but at some point, did they have their own? I'd like to have that conversation.
I can answer the question anecdotally, which I know isn't perfect, but anecdotally, the following seems to be true, and there are not one answer to your question, as you might expect. One answer clearly seems to be that when they decided to privatize, it was almost a bait and switch, which is to say, they got sucked in, and then once they had eliminated the capacity of the town to do it, the cost of changing their mind was so expensive that they just swallowed it and kept doing it, but now they're really paying a really hefty bill, and that's what I'm being told by some superintendents. The second reason is, no joke, the hassles associated with providing transportation to a superintendent, and therefore by extension to a school committee, are enormous. And so it's considered to be removing all the flack that transportation services generates is worth paying a premium to do it. The third reason is that there are many communities that did not, and Mary Jane is a good example, her predecessor, Joe Netto, and I guess there was probably someone before
Yes, there
Joe,
was.
one other person before Joe, actually benefited in two ways. One is to their credit, and one is perhaps luck, and that is the initial capital investment to get into it was minor, which is to say $150,000 for that building, as compared to what Concord was going to spend $1.5 million to do the same thing based on the Standard Times article that I recently read. And on top of that, we set a tone very early that drivers in general would not get benefits. And benefits are a huge expense, both active as well as retirees. So for those three reasons, anecdotally, it appears that people are either regretting the fact that they do it now privately, but can't get out of it because the cost of getting out of it would be so expensive and they don't have the in-house expertise to take it on, or because they just don't want to touch it because they see it as just such a distraction from the process of educating children. I'll add one more thing since you brought up regionalization, and that is up until about 2004 or 5, and I say this from my finance committee days, we actually got $250,000 a year to transport children. That was eliminated for all the non-regionalized school systems. School systems that are regionalized now get transportation reimbursement. We don't. So that's another reason why those 20 regionals, which represent a chunk, maybe 30% of the Commonwealth, like ORR, they're very happy to say, oh, gee, if I decided not to do it, not to privatize and go back to, I would lose all that money associated with regional transportation from the state. So there's a fourth reason. But I admit those are anecdotal. I admit I had the same reaction when I found out we were relatively unique, and I was just thrilled because it meant that we didn't have to deal with the fact that the cost of privatization I don't think we can afford.
Well, can I respond?
Please.
Is that okay?
Mark,
of course, please, go ahead.
How many school superintendents did you discuss this particular issue with, privatizing or in-house, would you say?
oh, I would say about a dozen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean, it's anecdotal.
Right. I guess because there's so many costs associated with, certainly, that this is clear. I mean, how many trees died for this? And I'm sure that there's reams of paperwork in the office. And the fact is that we're saying that having it in-house is underfunded. Yeah, right? I mean, that's simple. Simple.
I
It's
actually have,
underfunded.
I actually have some good news on that front.
But wait, let
But
me-
yes, the short answer is yes.
Let me finish. So we're saying that the current, running our own transportation department is currently underfunded. We're saying that we have antiquated buses in a state of kind of, well, it's not disrepair because you guys are keeping them on the road, but there are many that are off the road because of their age and use. Let's face the facts. So we're talking about replacing them. So whether we replace the buses, we're underfunded, whether we replace the buses and keep them in-house, which is gonna, none of these expenses are gonna go down, we privatize.
No, that's not true. Under warranty will save us some on the repair.
But there's also still gonna be the expenses, we're still gonna have the homeless population, we're still gonna have all of these things in here. We are still, so we're saying, you're saying that if we keep it in-house, how many buses do you want a year?
If we want to have a fleet that averages 5 years of age and is no bus is older than 10, we will need approximately 5 buses a year. That's a combination of big bus, smaller bus.
Right, I understand that. So, what are we bringing what's the bottom line for keeping it in-house? With purchasing 5 to 7 buses.
I'm glad you asked
per
that
year.
question. The good news is that even though the cost of replacing 5 buses a year is $450,000 a year, I have discussed these numbers in detail with both Jeff and Barry, and actually the FY13 proposed budget is actually higher than it needs to be because it was built based on the assumption that we wouldn't be getting any new buses. So we could actually live with the town administrator's proposed number if we got some new buses. So from an operating perspective, the 1.34 million in your preliminary budget, plus the cost of replacing, I know, and you can speak to this better than I can, Mary Jane, I believe the Capital Planning Committee has assumed a debt exclusion for 10 new buses. Is that correct or not?
I don't know that, and I don't believe
Okay.
that.
No,
Okay,
that's not happened.
Okay, that wasn't our request, that was their proposal. Our request is as many as possible, but a minimum of 5. So that would be, say, 450,000. So if we added 450,000 to the 1.3, you can see you're up to about 1.8 million. That is, so if you want a number, a round number, the cost to the town for FY13 would be $1.8 million. And it would grow a little bit each year from that. The good news is that every time we replaced really old buses with new buses, the cost of maintaining the entire fleet would be not go up in any event, because some of the work would be done under warranty instead of by our mechanics.
Mr. Chairman,
Spare parts, etc. Yeah, Ellen looks a little concerned. I won't say confused, I'll say concerned.
Yeah,
So,
I'm not confused.
okay, so what was it about what I said that concerned you,
I'm thinking
other than the
about-
big number?
Well, no, because that big number is a whole lot bigger 3 years into a project like that, because it would be $450,000 to $500,000, because you're talking 5 buses a year.
Yes.
Debt exclusion for that. So
No,
then,
actually, we could do a debt exclusion, but I think it would be a disservice to the taxpayers to call it a debt exclusion. And the reason is,
you have to call it either an override or you have to call it a debt exclusion.
I agree. The reason I think calling it a debt exclusion is misleading is if I was a taxpayer and I thought about a debt exclusion, I'd think of it as a one-time expense. And
Right,
since we need it every year,
that's right.
then it's misleading to say it's a debt exclusion because it's every year we have to do that. So it's capital items that have to be replaced every year because we have 50 of them.
So what do you call it then?
Technically, it's an override because it's an operating, but it's also capital.
Which is also a permanent increase in the townspeople's taxes.
I agree with you completely.
A
So,
permanent increase, just for schools.
I agree with you. I would love to, by the way, I hate this because I think the state is the one that ought to be paying for this because the state has failed us by millions and millions of dollars because they failed to update, as I've said many times publicly. But that misses the point, and that is, unless someone sues the state, they're only going to give us what they feel like giving us, no matter how hard Mark works with his connections to get them to give us a little bit more money. But the bottom line is, if we want to be in this business, which is another important topic for this committee, it seems to me, if we want to provide full service to our parents and children, just the way we've been doing it since we started this process, it will cost about $1.8 million because that's what's necessary to have a modern fleet. The comparison to privatization, say it's another $500,000 or so. It's a big number. But we could theoretically reduce service, or we could charge the end users, the parents. That's another question I think needs to be asked of this committee so that we have a consensus on that issue. But does 1.8 million, is it significantly higher than we are currently spending? There is no question, you're right, and it's terribly unfortunate. If it was a debt exclusion that was paid in 1 year, which is technically what it should be because it's only lasting 1 year because we have to do it again, it would cost the median taxpayer about $30. Just to put, I mean, because everybody hates the D word and the O word, but people should understand that if your house is valued on your tax form, on your tax bill at $230,000, then what it would cost is a little less than $30 a year to fund the transportation department so that we have a modern fleet, a reasonable fleet.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
First of all, I don't know where the $30 came from. I don't know how you calculate it.
Yes.
Don't interrupt, please. You make me lose my train of thought.
Got it.
I don't know where the $30 came from. We're asking 50% of the property owners in town that don't have an investment. You're going to hear this argument, that don't have an investment in these children. They come down here, they pay full-time taxes for part-time services, and we're going to ask them to have a permanent increase in their taxes. The summer residents even already have to pay a personal tax, which, when I was a summer resident, I was not happy about that. It was ridiculous. It was certainly, people would say, well, it's only $25 at that time. I don't know even if it still exists. But these are questions or concerns that people are going to be bringing to all of us. And I think that having a conversation, and I know that Mark may have spoken to some of the surrounding town administrators or whoever he spoke to, but I personally would like to have those conversations, and I would certainly encourage any other citizen in the town to speak to people that have privatized their services. I'm not entirely convinced that the RFP for the Cadillac of services, I think that there are other ways for that RFP to go out. That's my personal opinion, the RFP that went out from the school department. Just let me finish, because maybe, then you can have your argument, you can debate me on the issue. Not an argument, debate. Reading the newspaper about what's going on with all of the school departments, with all of the towns, with all of the cities, I don't think that it's going to be uncommon for us to see that people are going to have to decrease their services on so many levels. And that's going to happen across the town. It may have to be fee-for-service for schools. That's something that none of us want to see that happen, but we are not the first town that would consider that option. We are not going to be the last town. I think we're going to be kind of in line with towns. That is the way it is right now. The Chapter 70 reimbursements, any of the funds that have been coming from the state, we're not seeing any of them increase. In fact, we're kind of all biting our nails, waiting for those numbers to come out, because your budget is based on what you're hopeful for, and it's not happening. So I think that just making it's not as simplistic, and I know you appreciate this, Jeff, it's not as simplistic as in-house privatize. Because I think that we can be creative, and it's gonna have to be a compromise on both sides. It's not gonna be an all or nothing type thing. I mean, do we have contracts, we already contract some out, but do we privatize some and keep something in-house? And see, and realize some sort of, I don't even wanna say cost savings, that we don't, and I can't even say level funded, because that is not gonna happen, no matter what we do. It's gonna be bumped up, no matter what decision this committee, what consensus this committee comes to. But whatever consensus that we come to, I agree with you, that if we don't present a united front, it's just gonna be the usual town meeting floor discussions.
My only response is that, as I've said to our superintendent many times, I never have and hopefully never will try to get him to tell him how to educate children. I don't have any expertise. In fact, I just struggle tutoring one child at a time. But I do have expertise with respect to numbers in business. And to me, the privatization versus staying public isn't a close decision. And the differences would only get worse if we separated them into, for example, sped versus regular, and gave a contract to one and kept the other in-house. And the reason is because you always have a certain amount of fixed overhead that would not disappear. And that would just mean that the expertise that we get in our manager would be spread over less of a business, and therefore the costs would be proportionally higher on a per mile basis, per student basis, whatever. So to me, the issue, and I was hoping we could get past this tonight, but maybe not, the issue of privatization versus in-house is a slam dunk from my perspective as a business person. I have looked at it every way you can possibly do it, because, and in fact, I went into it almost hoping that we could privatize so that we could get it off the table and focus on educating kids. And the reality was I couldn't even get close to that as an argument, and therefore I said, we're in the business of transportation whether we like it or not, because we can't afford to privatize. So I would like to get to the far more, in my mind, difficult subject, because, and I don't pretend any expertise on this issue, which is how do we pay for transportation? Because I think that's either way, because I think that's a really difficult question. I just want to add just 2 points and then I will recognize you. I just want to repeat what I said last week. We can save about $200,000 by charging parents on a fee-for-service end-user basis. That's assuming that all the kids who ride the bus today choose to pay the fee. We run the risk, and it's a significant risk, that parents will say, I can't afford $180 a year, especially if I have 2 kids or 3 kids or more, and therefore I'm going to find another way to do it, carpooling, whatever, because I just can't afford it. We can also save even more than that, especially if we simply reduce services, which is we simply say, the law says provide services K through 6. We're not going to provide services 7 through 12, and we'll save perhaps as much as 50% more than that, maybe 300 some odd thousand, because we'll have 13 fewer vehicles. We will have to replace that many fewer vehicles. And so the savings is significant, especially when you include depreciation and the capital associated with a fleet that would, instead of being 50 vehicles, would now be less than 40 vehicles. So both of those things are possible. I don't pretend any expertise with respect to what the right decision is on that. I have my own philosophical view, but that's not expertise. So I would love to get to those really critical questions, but we can't do that if we're still debating public-private.
That's right. I agree.
Mary Jane, thank you for your patience.
Just in the interest of clarity, you're way past when this question popped into my head, but you talked about the budget that you presented versus the budget if you had new buses or
Yes.
something, the amount of the cost, and that it would be cheaper maintenance-wise. But you do realize, just so you know, and just so everybody understands, that you might save some money in maintenance, but the insurance for a new vehicle would be higher than what we're paying now.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, just
That's absolutely correct.
so you realize it.
Yep.
I don't want to sound like a naysayer or sour grapes or anything, but I'm just pointing out that fact, so that.
And that's, by the way, those are part of the decision-making processes that have to be taken into consideration, which is why if we privatized, that insurance cost would disappear. And if we got newer buses, insurance would actually go up.
Right.
So that's why this couldn't be a close decision, or else you'd say, gee, I really need to get out my pencil. But the fact is, we're hundreds of thousands of dollars away from it being a close decision. Mark, I know you had a comment you
Well,
wanted to make.
just on the ability, just on what the overall budget shape, maybe shaped this fiscal year. I do spend a fair amount of time on Beacon Hill and talking to representatives and senators. Have urged the people I've talked to pass a local aid resolution, both for Chapter 70 and unrestricted local aid. What does that do? It locks our numbers in that are not on the sheet that could cause us panic in other areas of education. So that's number one, and I'm going to be urging my Board of Selectmen to take a position very aggressively on that, as the Mass Municipal Association, and I'm sure your professional associations have advocated for. The next area is, just to speak to Selectwoman Begley's point, next Wednesday, I just asked them if they had in-house or out of privatization. And next Wednesday, the town administrators on the South Coast will meet, and I will bring this up to them. There are many more folks with many more years of experience at this than I, but which I'm not shy in asking for their feedback on that. Whatever we do, my opinion philosophically, because we can debate regressive or progressive taxation till the cows come home, that it should be based on the person's or the family's ability to pay in some format. I know that might sound difficult, but that's just how I feel about it, because I know we go from some of the poorest neighborhoods to some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in town, and so I'd like just to hear that out at some point.
Just to be clear, Mark, are you
Yep.
saying the bus fees should be changed depending upon the income level of the person being charged?
I don't know if that's, I'm just looking at it as a philosophical idea relative, I don't know what the mechanics are, because I'm not gonna try to
Because
tell you.
property
do
taxes
your
are supposed to
business.
sort of do what you
Well,
described.
regressive,
Well, free lunch kids would be exempt from that
Exactly.
anyway.
sure, well, that's one point.
Because we talked about that in a prior meeting, that
Sure.
we knew.
That's why the numbers
free
are-
lunch kids wouldn't even,
A little over 1,100 of the three,
yeah.
only a little over 1,100 of the 3,000 we could even charge.
Right. And the last point, actually, I don't want to get back into the grid too much, but maybe on the line regarding bus depreciation, the numbers seem to jump up pretty high. Maybe we can take another look at that, if Jeff or somebody would.
They're my
advise
numbers,
that.
so feel free to fire away
Well,
anything.
I would just go from 200,000 on estimated bus depreciation on account 01-3300-01 to $400,000.
Right. 200 is based on real, which is to say half the fleet is fully depreciated, so it's the other half.
Okay.
400 is based on the assumption that we actually buy 5 buses every year,
Okay,
and we have an average fleet age of 5 years with nothing more than 10.
okay.
But it would rise to 667,000, which is why you see that number in the notes, if we actually wanted a younger fleet than that. And the reason I did that is because the original bid document had that, and I wanted to make it apples to apples. So you'd literally add 260,000, and that's why when you still end up with about a $500,000 difference, it just isn't close.
Just the last point, and then we're going to be going from what was a initial proposal back in December, seems like it was a million years ago right now, to some actual debate and discussion about the real numbers, which are difficult, very difficult on the town side, I can say that to you. And we've had some working sessions with Barry and with Anna and other departments in town, that I don't see the $100,000 for capital anywhere.
That's correct. Capital is not included.
Okay, so I'm just saying,
You're right.
so we could go.
Not because we don't appreciate it,
Yeah.
it's just not appropriate for any part of this particular P and L.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that it could get us closer to the finish line if in fact we go in a direction that says we've done discussing private, public, we're gonna go in a direction, let's see what the
It
100
would
gets.
take that 400 and make it 300. So we talked about the number of 1.8 versus the 1.34 it would make it, in essence, 100,000 less than that we had to come up with because 100 is already allocated. Quite correct.
Now, once again, I don't know the meals piece of it, we're gonna have to have long and hard discussion about how we maintain or have some level of foundation budget before we get to the use of that. But in my town administrator's budget, just wanna make sure that it was clear that maybe we should put a footnote that, we've got 100,000 aside for the
Fine.
school district. So
Okay.
that way people looking at it would be able to say, well, at least it's a starting point, if in fact we do decide to go in-house or stay in-house, and those are the points that I just wanted to make to you.
Can I just ask a question, because I know everybody wants to get home, but the vehicle insurance right now is about almost $250,000. So if we had new buses, that would go up significantly. Now, are there other...
Offset by maintenance reductions,
Yeah,
as Mary
well,
Jane said.
I understand. Are there other costs associated, this is for my own information, because I didn't fully appreciate that on the town side.
I'm sorry, you said vehicle insurance was 200-something thousand? No, it's 28,000.
Oh, that's the whole thing.
That's the total.
So 20,000. So we're talking about vehicle insurance would probably go up, it wouldn't be unusual for it to be 50. Say it would
No,
double for
because-
something brand new.
Unfortunately, if we're only talking 5 buses, that's only 10% of the entire fleet. So it's not going to go up.
It's not that significant.
It's not as significant as
Okay,
it
so
might
I was
be.
looking at the line item total, so please forgive me.
Okay,
It's 6:30.
yes.
Are there other costs
Finance committee.
associated with, because I think about,
Sorry.
it's just like when somebody builds a house, they think about the walls, the roof, but they're not thinking about the doorknobs, the hinges, those kinds of things. So are there other costs associated that, because there's costs associated with running the town side, that there's gonna come a point, if not this year, next year or subsequent years, that we're gonna be looking at employees using town vehicles or employees with town-owned cell phones unless they're emergency personnel, those kinds of things. So are there other, and I'm not saying that they're not 100% required, but are there, of course they are, or they wouldn't be in place. But are there other costs associated with transportation that, because we're just thinking about, the buses, what happens in the garage and the mechanics. So are there other costs associated with running the whole transportation department?
Please.
I would say that Mr. Sweat has been quite specific in including everything
Right,
in
but
his P&L.
But I'm asking, and I understand, I think
And
that's,
I would say there are no others, because everything is charged to that department.
right, I understand that, but just for my own information, because I know we,
Are you specifically addressing inflation?
no.
Okay.
I'm not being clear. From going to the capital planning meetings, for example, in April, people were saying, oh my gosh, my 4x4 is falling apart, I need a new one. And they're like, okay, we're gonna recommend that. Well, now, what capital planning is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Mary Jane, but they're saying, those little vehicles that all the towns are starting to buy kind of in bulk because it's less expensive. Granted, it's not a great big, 4x4, but they're looking, the way they looked at replacement vehicles even 6-9 months ago, they're looking at completely differently today. So that's my question. So do we have, I'm sure it's in here, but for example, for the transportation beyond buses, there's only one vehicle. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
I'm not, this isn't a criticism.
I can't answer that question. How
So
many, besides the fleet of 50 small and large buses, how many other vehicles? One?
Just one.
Okay.
But which is great, because we've got a whole lot more than that on the town side. And then I think that, of course, you have to have a functioning, some sort of radio system, or, I assume.
It's included in the cost.
But it's included in the cost. People need to know that, though, that it's not just a bus and a driver and a student, that there are other cost factors that go into this. I'm not, and believe me, I'm not trying to hijack you, or I'm not trying to do anything. I think that people need to appreciate that there are other costs associated with any department, and that's true of any of the town departments. So people don't understand that we have some people that have a uniform allowance, or safety clothing and boots, those kinds of things. So there's more to it. So people look at it just as, like, say, the number of drivers, and on the town side, they'll say the number of employees in a certain department. It's not that simple. And many of the employees, that's going to happen, and it's also happening in the school department, we are getting down to bare bones in many of the town side of the departments.
I agree, yes.
Yes, and I think that she's got a point, and sometimes there are like hidden costs, I think what she's talking about, and things that we don't realize, like people with cell phones. But because the transportation department's budget includes every single expense, basically, that even the expense of a driver taking the bus to their home, it's included in there because it comes out in the fuel, comes out in the wear and tear, it comes out in that. So all of that does end up. I can't think of anything other than maybe the cell phone, which I think that comes out of the budget too. So there's really nothing that doesn't show up in the numbers somehow.
So everything is in there. Everything is in here. But people need to know that when they're, I'm just speaking for, to the viewing audience, that this isn't, and then, and plus.
No, as a matter of fact, what we tried to do for the first time, I think, and I think Barry would agree with this, is include everything that doesn't show up to town meeting ever, because it's just not part of the regular non-net budget. But it is, in fact, a true expense associated with the fact that the department exists. There is literally only one thing that I forgot to include, and that is depreciation on the building. But the building was so cheap, and he spread it out over 30 years, that it literally would be like a few $1,000s a year. So it's a trivial amount, but you could theoretically add that. But other than that, everything to our knowledge is included. I know people are pressed for time. I know the Finance Committee would like our town administrator present. I would like to do this with the committee's approval. I would like us to reconvene the same time next week, 5 o'clock on Wednesday. Does that work for you?
Well, Mr. Andrews said he was going to meet with the South Coast town administrators. Will that give him enough time to?
I believe it's that day, Ellen,
You said it was Wednesday.
Great, okay. And I would like us to be prepared to try and, let's see, if you've had a meeting and you can get it on the agenda, I think it would be very helpful to know how your committee feels on the critical issues of how do we pay for it, private or public, it's an expense, and what are we willing to ask parents to do, both in terms of putting money up and in terms of reduced services, i.e. literally stop providing services grades 7 through 12. That's not a financial question in a sense, it's also a philosophical question, because the alternative is an override or a debt exclusion or some combination of the two, and I think it would be very helpful if we could speak for our committees whenever possible. I know speaking for a committee in the case of the school committee and the Board of Selectmen is very difficult.
Can't do it.
You can't do it. Okay, I understand.
I can't do it because I can come here and ask questions and get information and even make a recommendation to the board, but I can't speak for the board.
But could you take a sense of the committee by putting it on the agenda?
Oh, certainly.
And that's really all I am asking for. That's really all, and that I will try to do the same.
But I think that us, like I had a lot of questions, and I feel your frustration. I know it's been a long time, and you have an action committee, and you want action. You want us to, either way, sign on the dotted line, let's, come as a united front. I get it. But at the same time, I'm kind of uncomfortable. I mean, I'll ask questions, but I want to, there's a reason why this is televised. I'm asking questions because I have the questions, just as Mary Jane said earlier. If I have the questions, I may be someone at home, or one of the citizens might be saying, "Geez,
Exactly.
what the heck is this?" Or why don't you ask this? I'm just kind of speaking for the every guy. You have lived these numbers.
But I also,
For some
like you,
time.
have a constituency.
Absolutely, absolutely, but, I
Yes, thank you.
But Jeff, to her point, the whole point is, in the end, no matter what we decide here, we have to go before town meeting. And if the people in town meeting don't trust us, or don't believe the numbers, or don't, because that's what happens. They say, oh, those numbers aren't real, oh, those numbers aren't this, oh. So you need to make sure that that's what this is all about, is that they understand what's going on, and so that if the numbers seem clear to them, so when you present them at town meeting, they can say, oh, yeah, I remember that question was asked.
Which is why anything you can do to get comfortable between now and next week, including meeting with Jeff, because I know he will make himself available, because I think we can spend a lot of time going back and forth on things, and comfort level, in my mind, is usually achieved one-on-one with the person who is responsible for the
You
numbers.
missed the point. The point was not our comfort level, their comfort level.
I understand what you're saying,
That's
but
the point.
my point, and I think Ellen made the point earlier, is if we're all on the same page and we all believe something, then we have a responsibility as elected town officials and appointed leaders, in the case of yourself, to get behind something, because I remember what it was like before I was on the FinCom. I would go to town meetings and I would try to get a sense of whether I could trust the people in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
If all of them were saying the same thing, then I got a great deal more comfort than if there were warring bodies. And I think that's what most people
Okay.
feel. That's really what it comes down to, because frankly, no one's going to have the expertise that you and Jeff have as a result of spending years in this area. No one's going to necessarily have the expertise that I have in something, that Ellen has in other areas, that Barry. So they have to, at some point, whether they like it or not, and I agree trust is a factor, whether they like it or not, there has to be a point at which you trust, and you're more likely to trust when everybody is saying the same thing. And the reality is, the really stark reality is, that if we keep just debating, discussing, etc., every day the buses get older, more fragile, and I don't want to sit here and have my cell phone go off or Barry's cell phone go off to say that something terrible has happened because an ancient bus, somehow broke down.
Yeah, no one knows it better than me.
I just have a
Exactly.
couple questions about numbers so that we don't have to revisit this.
I was going to in fact ask if we could, if there are specific questions that come to you between now and our next meeting.
I wrote a note.
If people could email them to Jeff so we could have them for you.
Right. That's
So not,
why-
Even the
looking in-
public too, could they email questions that they might have?
I have been on a blog, and I never
okay.
blog, and I literally said, I'd be glad to have coffee or tea with anybody.
Well, not
who
just,
wanted
I
I
like
to
to
go
see
over
people
this.
come and
have
ask
them
their questions.
attend or send in questions, and you can say, this is from a citizen that, yada, yada. So, everybody out there, email,
Come.
Chairman Sweat, come. It's nice
Yeah,
and comfortable in
come.
here. But I have a couple questions that I jotted down here. If that's okay.
Yes.
Because that way we won't have to address them. Are Chapter 70 reimbursements buried in here somewhere?
No.
Okay, where are
Zip,
those?
Zilch. They're all on the LEA regular net school budget line.
Okay,
May I just clarify?
For
Yes.
sure.
Net school spending and non-net school spending, any of the money that we spend on transportation
yes,
cannot be counted towards our minimum contribution for education.
yes. Okay,
So it's a town expense,
So by
not a school
definition.
department. Yes.
by definition. And I was wondering about I saw some, as happens when you have a department that has vehicles, that there was some insurance reimbursements on here. It said collision.
When the buses get in accidents, the insurance money goes back that way.
So it goes
doesn't
back into the revolving account? It doesn't go into general funds?
No, because the money was paid and therefore it goes back into the revolver to offset the next accident or whatever else had to be paid.
Okay. And then final question, because it kind of popped out at me, and I'm sure Jeff will appreciate this. What page was it and what year? I saw that there was '08 and '09. It said incorrect year for the healthcare trust fund taken out,
Oh, yeah.
which popped right out at
You
me.
remember that. With the year that we hadn't paid the insurance, and so they caught it like the next year, and we ended up having to make two.
So we made 2 payments that year to the health trust fund for the bus driver's insurance.
So this was in '09, and so one was for nearly $80,000 and one was for nearly $90,000.
Right.
So you, in prior, so in '08 and '09, you had not
Paid.
paid.
Correct.
Okay. I think that's
Of
all I
course,
jotted
that's an
down.
internal payment. Just got missed between the two bodies.
It's a
Can I ask
significant
a
sum of
question?
money, though.
It is a significant sum of money, absolutely.
Can I ask a subsequent question to one of her questions that's just coming to me now? The insurance question, only because I remember when the vehicle that I was driving was in an accident and the insurance money never showed up in the revolving account, and I was told that there's now an insurance account, no? That it had to be kept separate or something?
There is an insurance account, but that's normally for when we had the water damage, and then we were going to be reimbursed by the government body that reimbursed us for the hurricane.
FEMA.
Right, so we spent the money first out of that account. In fact, we spent it into deficit. Then when the money came, it went back into that account.
So does the money then from the bus accidents go
But
there?
it's, the difference being net school and non-net.
Okay,
So we've always kept that separate.
except for that one accident that I had,
I guess, I don't know why it was put in there, to be honest.
okay.
The law doesn't allow us to do anything with the revolver other than support the transportation department anyway. So, I mean,
No, I
it's-
understand.
Okay,
we're just glad to have it because it actually generates a surplus.
So because so the insurance, the vehicle insurance for the school buses comes out of the revolver?
That's where we have paid for it before, yes.
So that's where it comes out. So that's why if there is an accident and there's any kind of reimbursement from the insurance company, it goes back in.
Correct.
So it doesn't go into general funds. So there's no money, no revenue that comes in that has anything to do with transportation that would be designated for like town general funds. It would
None.
always be in and out of the revolver.
Correct.
Is that correct?
I can't think of any. And Barry, in his past life as the assistant superintendent, was into that in depth. So I'll certainly trust his judgment, but I can't think of any.
I can't.
Are there there's other revolving accounts for the, I'm sure you've got many,
For the school,
for the school.
school side, not the transportation side.
No, there's only one for the
Right.
transportation side. But I'm sure you have many, because I know
But
there's
they don't
quite a
mix
few.
in any way, shape, or form.
It can't,
Can,
by law.
by law.
Understand. Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.